Unparalleled in the entire world is New Zealand's apocalyptic use of one of the most dangerous poisons known to man, to which there is no antidote: sodium monofluoroacetate, commonly known as compound 1080. It's a broad-spectrum universal poison, harming any life form dependent upon oxygen, down to soil microbes. It was first patented in Germany as an insecticide in 1927. The Nazis have considered using 1080 in their Holocaust death camps for their end solution, but rejected the idea, deeming it too dangerous for their guards. The FBI has classified 1080 as a super poison. Scientists have speculated that compound 1080 could be mixed in with water supplies in a terrorist attack. It's been called a great tool for assassination, as it is tasteless, odorless, and colorless. 1 teaspoon of the raw 1080 can kill over 100 people. For these very valid reasons, it appropriately is banned or highly regulated in most countries in this world. After World War II, it was used in the US for rodent control. Aerial poisoning with 1080 started in New Zealand about 70 years ago to eradicate invasive mammals in the name of protecting our declining biodiversity. In 2012, this poison warfare against nature evolved into government policy and was named Predator-Free New Zealand 2050. It needs to be highlighted that the Department of Conservation had stolen this name and concept from the original founder, Les Kelly. Les and his group had developed an entirely toxin-free predator control program to replace the deadly 1080 and brodifacoum. Their methods were based on their core philosophy that predator control has to be humane, sustainable, and would have come at minimal costs to the New Zealand taxpayer.
1080 is an alias for monofluoroacetate, a chemical. It blocks a particular step in the Krebs cycle, which is essential for the metabolism of oxygen in every cell of every animal.
Translocated fauna and flora species have changed the ecology and biodiversity of the entire planet Earth. Whether ancient indigenous people took their domestic animals, seeds and plants with them when they migrated across the continents, or animals and seeds were carried for thousands of miles on the wind and on waters, or they were brought by early settlers on ships or imported by modern-day farming and horticulture. That's evolution. Progressive conservationists and ecologists have recognized that we need to change our ideas of what biodiversity means. After all, farm animals and our companion animals are not endemic to New Zealand, and neither are we humans. Of course, now that we've seen the devastating effects of our doing, we need to apply the precautionary principle and avoid harming our native biodiversity even further. Like everywhere in the world, there certainly are sensitive ecological areas and vulnerable flora and fauna here in New Zealand, and they do need special protection. However, we simply cannot turn back time. Throughout history, humans had a tendency to shift blame, which is exemplified in the biblical ritual of scapegoating. In our government's entire predator-free 2050 propaganda, this scapegoating becomes blatantly obvious by the total omission of the fact that, for example, in Northland, the stronghold for the North Island brown kiwi, 70% of adult kiwi birds are actually killed by domestic dogs. There are an estimated 850,000 dogs in New Zealand, and dog numbers are booming. It needs to be noted that unlike Australia, New Zealand fortunately has very few feral dogs. Just one roaming dog on a hunting spree, let alone a pack of dogs, can kill sheep and even cows, or an unfortunate human. Kiwi birds are an easy target. With these dramatic dog attack numbers totally swept under the carpet in the government's narrative of biodiversity decline, the predator-free policy seems to be strongly motivated by flag-waving and virtue signaling. No doubt, most people involved in pest control are well-meaning. However, their ideology and motivation is strongly influenced by decades of government propaganda and peer pressure. A paper on human-animal studies by PhD candidate Emily Major of the University of Canterbury confirms this. Major says, "What humans are doing is completely destroying New Zealand. In order to placate ourselves and make humans feel better for what we're doing to the environment, we are scapegoating possums," Major wrote. By trapping, poisoning, and shooting possums, Pākehā are trying to justify their own place in a country their ancestors colonized, a process that was disastrous for native species, the natural environment, and Maori. The hatred directed at possums doesn't actually have much to do with the animals. It has everything to do with human understandings of belonging here in New Zealand. Enlightened conservation and ecology scientists, such as Professor Wayne Linklater and Dr. Jamie Steer, have condemned this insane biocidal poison warfare.
Fortunately, there's a better alternative to Predator-Free 2050. It's based on a better science and a better policy. First, we've proven that it's possible to protect our most vulnerable biodiversity in sanctuaries.
Our responsibilities, for example, are not just to native species, they're also to our introduced species as well, and even those we currently consider to be pests.
Scientific findings that some of these so-called pest species have in fact become beneficial to our ecosystems are not invited into the public arena and are suppressed in the national narrative. An article in the New Zealand Journal of Ecology stated, "Although possums may increase the spread of invasive weeds, their seed dispersal behavior may offer conservation benefits by accelerating succession in seral vegetation. Because of the reduction in numbers of large-gaped native birds, such as the caribou, a native pigeon, possums may now be the only dispersal agents for large-seeded native species in many areas." Research on feral cats has shown that their dominant prey is rats, mice, and rabbits, so cats are beneficial in controlling these species. This is not to say that invasive introduced animals should not be carefully monitored and controlled where necessary, but a total eradication of these species, which for hundreds of years have to a degree integrated into our ecosystems, most of which have been entirely modified and severely degraded by humans, could lead to the same catastrophic effects China experienced in the early 1960s. The eradication of sparrows in China as part of the Four Pests campaign contributed to the Great Chinese Famine. The campaign, which also targeted rats, flies, and mosquitoes, involved killing sparrows, believed to be a major pest of crops. However, sparrows also consume insects, including locusts. With the sparrow population nearly exterminated, locust populations exploded, leading to widespread crop destruction and exacerbating the famine, which lasted from 1959 to 1961, resulted in an estimated death toll due to starvation of over 45 million people. Pest control is big business, providing a multitude of jobs not only for the charities but also for rural communities. Many pest control operators are aware that killing exotic species can result in the opposite of what they are aiming to achieve. For example, eradicating all mustelids, stoats, weasels, and ferrets, which were introduced to control rodents, rabbits, and hares, will result in a plague of these animals. Rabbits have devastating effects on the native ecosystems, predating on indigenous flora and on agricultural and horticultural crops. Yet rabbits are not included in the list of evil villains in our government's propaganda. Wouldn't it make more sense to first bring the rodents and rabbits under control, which are the most prolific breeders, by using species-specific contraceptives, before we start decimating their natural enemies, the carnivorous predators? Conservation policies focus strongly on eradication of introduced mammals, with a very myopic focus on what the most destructive species are, and less on restoration activities, such as reforestation and regulation of destructive primary industries. The New Zealand Department of Conservation is the major driver of aerial poisoning, and they are joined in this destruction by Osprey, Operational Solutions for Primary Industries, formerly Animal Health Board, a group set up to eradicate New Zealand's bovine tuberculosis by poisoning possums to supposedly prevent transmission to cattle. It should be noted that New Zealand is by world standards TB-free.
In terms of managing TB in cattle in New Zealand, we know that it's almost non-existent anyway. And the plan that's being put out at the moment, that we go forward to 2055 or whatever the year is, and spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more, is quite frankly inexplicable, given that over the last 10 years the incidence of TB in both cattle and possums has been pretty much flatlined at around about that 0.04% mark. It's almost as if the problem has already been solved, and for some reason nobody wants to admit that.
Possums are not the original source of TB, cattle are. Stress, malnutrition, and poor animal husbandry, such as industrial farming, weakens the immune systems of cattle, and they become more susceptible to infections and diseases, which decreases their life expectancy dramatically. The 1080 poisoning program is endorsed by conservation NGOs such as Forest and Bird, Landcare, Worldwide Fund, Zero Invasive Predators, the Morgan Foundation, and the Kia Conservation Trust, all groups that capitalize on the perceived crisis for fundraising appeals and their jobs. These organizations are totally ignoring the irrefutable fact that 1080 was originally designed as an insecticide. With their colossal blanket dispersions of 1080, they effectively wipe out an immeasurable number of insect species and other invertebrates. In doing so, they inflict starvation, death, or ill health by secondary poisoning on the entire ecological community, resulting in horrendous and far-reaching collateral damage. 1080 is one of New Zealand's most contentious issues. The Department of Conservation's own survey in 2016 showed that only 9% of New Zealanders had no concerns with the use of 1080 to control pests. Polls have indicated that about 80% of New Zealanders are not supporting the use of 1080 poison. International conservation advocates have commented on the dangers of 1080 and criticized the use of it. The Jane Goodall Institute has published a paper titled The Ethical Cost of Predator-Free New Zealand 2050, Suffering in the Name of Conservation. This paper by Dr. Cohen Margot, an independent scientist, details why the Predator-Free New Zealand 2050 program is not only unethical, unnecessary, and unrealistic, but why it is doomed to fail and what the safe and humane alternatives are. In 2009, the brothers Clyde and Steve Graff documented the ecocide and biocide from this horrific poison 1080 and its twin poison brodifacoum in their internationally multi-award-winning film Poisoning Paradise, Ecocide New Zealand. The comprehensive and meticulously researched information they presented was backed up by a number of reputable scientists and experienced veterans in the biosecurity sector, who have proven that there is no benefit to our endemic wildlife through the use of 1080 and brodifacoum. The graphs also demonstrated that the impact of the so-called pest species is totally blown out of proportion by parties with a vested interest. This harrowing expose should have changed everything, and a total ban of the deadly poison 1080 implemented immediately and forever. Significantly, it was boycotted by New Zealand's mainstream media, and to this day, this pivotal information is withheld from the public. That the graphs have hit the nerve is clearly indicated by how much our government is trying to silence them. An unknown person had posted a profile of Clyde Graff on Wikipedia, constituting nothing but character assassination, and the graphs were targeted by a government employee who deleted anti-1080 information from a Wikipedia page while at work. Yet the nightmare continues. New Zealand uses about 80 to 90% of the world's supply of 1080. Our government is spending around $66 million of taxpayers' dollars per year to protect our native biodiversity, and in the course is killing much of the wildlife they supposedly are trying to protect, as well as poisoning the water and soils. The Department of Conservation and associated organizations spend over $20 million annually on aerial 1080 drops. When you add the unknown costs from territorial and regional authorities, plus the approximate $74 million farmers spend each year on pest control, the total is staggering.
Possum's just a hyped up, demonized thing to keep a $100 million a year pest management industry running. So they've got to keep the fear of the possum alive, the fear of the mammalian browse.
And the way to do it is to have a villain that you can't beat. You don't defeat possums, you're going to have to fight them forever. That means $80 to $100 million on the DOC budget every year. In my mind, the only way this thing is going to go away is that if the international community gets involved. Finally, the whole world saying, you know, you guys are nuts. You got to stop this stuff. Stop this stuff. Stop.
No animal has been more demonized than the possum. The Handbook of New Zealand Mammals says they are best described as opportunistic herbivores, feeding mainly on leaves. But the Department of Conservation states that possums also eat eggs and chicks of endemic birds, such as the cararoo and kokako. Only a few instances of possums eating birds have ever been documented. 50 years of stomach content analysis has not revealed any remnants of birds, bird eggs, or endangered invertebrates. Yet, the ferocious possum myth lives on. It is also noteworthy that possums very rarely produce more than one young per year, and about 30% of them die before they reach sexual maturity. An ecologist who has worked for the New Zealand government has alluded that the possum hype was created by the commercial forestry industry. Possums can do damage in pine forests, causing economic losses and indirect costs related to control efforts. While the exact financial losses can vary, they can range from $60 million per year in direct losses to the private sector to over $100 million when including control costs. Possum control efforts, including government funding, research, and private sector initiatives, contribute to significant ongoing expenses. Looking at these phenomenal figures, we can see that the possum hype statement rings very true. Could it be that possum control is offloaded on the taxpayer, so that forestry's operational costs are minimized and their profits increased?
Do possums belong in New Zealand? No. When they came here, they started to eat our birds' eggs and even eat the chicks. If any possums, rats, stoats or weasels in New Zealand, are we going to have any of our endemic native birds left?
The indoctrination of the public with the concept of being at war with predators that supposedly destroy our country has long ago infiltrated our education system.
Wanted named Ferret, crime killing New Zealand's beautiful birds.
I'm running a bit of a propaganda campaign. It's a sad irony that I am teaching them a bit about killing soft furry animals.
Young school children are taught to kill so-called pest animals, which are vilified in environmental education programs bordering on fanatical. In fundraising school events and family fun festivals, possums seem to be singled out for cruel treatments, such as drowning possum babies in buckets of water or stomping on them. Their dead bodies are dressed up for competitions in Best Dressed Possum. There are possum tossing contests and other activities to humiliate their corpses. Dr. Michael Morris, environmental scientists questioned the ethics of the predator-free New Zealand program. The resources reviewed promote the view that non-native mammals should be killed. Children are provided with material designed to engender dislike towards non-native mammals, particularly possums.
Do I normally talk about how we kill things?
Resources conflate issues of conservation by tying it in with the protection of tourism, ornamental plants, and primary industries. Dr. Morris writes the disproportionate influence of Department of Conservation and predator-free New Zealand on the present de facto education strategy can be reasonably inferred. This encouragement of killing in environmental educational resources appears unique to New Zealand. It is discussed in light of increasing evidence that performing or witnessing animal abuse is a causal factor for future violence towards human and non-human animals. U.S. psychologist Mark Beekoff expresses his deep concerns in an article in Psychology Today and shares emails he has received from New Zealand parents of children traumatized through these kill fests. Indoctrinating children through propaganda to gain compliancy to a government agenda is a very dangerous road to walk. That is a strategy the Nazis and Chairman Mao Zedong used. Campaign posters featured dramatic depictions of children heroically exterminating the pests, and hence playing their role in the Great Leap Forward. Does this scenario look familiar? As an investment in the future of planet Earth, we should prioritize teaching children values such as appreciation of nature for her intrinsic values, compassion, and consideration for other life forms, not sadistic killing. New Zealand already has a bad track record in animal welfare. One only needs to look at the website of SAFE, New Zealand's leading animal rights charity, to get a picture how little animals are valued in our country. SAFE, the SPCA, and other animal welfare organizations have lobbied our government to ban 1080 for a long time. Scientists all over the world have long documented the alarming loss of bird life through pesticides. Meantime, a vast amount of research has confirmed what Rachel Carson had warned about in 1962.
But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
Birds are a crucial element of our ecosystems, controlling insects, spreading seeds, and pollinating about 5% of plants that humans use for food and medicine. But industrial agriculture, with its rapid expansion and use of toxic chemicals, is driving critical bird populations to extinction. In a country so highly reliant on toxic agrochemicals as New Zealand, it seems obvious that there must be a correlation between environmental toxins and the decline in our biodiversity. This fact is never mentioned in the alarming decline of New Zealand's bird and insect life. What could possibly warrant this military-style poison warfare against a fictitious fine build, a fabricated image of an evil and vicious enemy? This insane blanket dispersion of a deadly poison over vast areas of our land and waterways. Why does our government totally ignore independent science, totally ignores the global ban on 1080, and even more arrogantly and irresponsibly, totally ignores the material safety datasheet of the manufacturers? Safety datasheets are a legal document in which manufacturers outline the details of their products, such as hazard classification, and most importantly, how to use their products safely. Why risk the resulting destruction, environmental pollution, and inhumane suffering 1080 causes? The extremely high risk to non-target species, including humans, is simply not acceptable and extremely irresponsible. The danger is very real, as the three following cases show.
Gwen Gardner and Kathleen Bartlett assure us they're not members of a banned 1080 group, and their picnic in the 1080 drop zone was no publicity stunt but an innocent outing. Their story is a warning to everyone to keep an eye out for danger signs. The sisters admit they drove right past one but believe more warnings should have been in place. The sisters say their health has been affected and there's a scarcity of information on what to do if you're exposed to 1080.
Numb tongue, straight away that happened.
And each night since, I'm coughing, and I'm still coughing to this day.
Apparently my B12 is so low that, fatigue is one of the huge signs of it.
In November 2017, 3 members of a family were admitted to Waikato Hospital with severe health issues after consuming a curry containing wild pig. 1080 poisoning was the first suspected cause, but they were later misdiagnosed and treated for botulism, although the test results for the toxin were negative. Yet, the District Health Board rejected the possibility of 1080 poisoning, claiming that the people would have needed to eat a whole bowl full of 1080 bait to show such severe symptoms. The family was told that they may just have to live with not knowing what has caused their illness.
Blood tests that they did the most of the routine tests, and they were all consistent with what you'd expect from 1080 poisoning. Unfortunately, they didn't do a reasonably common test, the citric acid test, which would have given us a really clear indication of whether there was 1080 poisoning or not, because that test looks at changes to the Krebs cycle. It's got all the hallmarks of a cover-up.
And there are other bizarre cases. Why does our government insist on carpet bombing our country with one of the world's deadliest and cruelest poisons? Why insist on this insanity? Tragically, the ill-conceived predator-free New Zealand 2050 program, which evolved into the world's biggest poison campaign against nature, was launched by our government in 2016.
Today announcing we have adopted the goal of a predator-free New Zealand. By 2050, every single part of New Zealand will be completely free of rats, stoats, and possums. This is the most ambitious conservation project attempted anywhere in the world, but we believe if we all work together as a country, we can achieve it.
In his book, Duped, the true story behind predator-free New Zealand, Les Kelly chronicles his experience of the orchestrated lies, deceit, and theft committed by our Department of Conservation. Ultimately, our government foiled what could have become the world's largest green toxin-free initiative. Les became convinced that our government has an ulterior motive, intentionally killing our native wildlife, in order to cater for the exploitation of our natural resources by multinational corporations. Recalling the atrocious track record of our government's overall environmental performances and policies in this light, one can only arrive at the logical conclusion that this dogmatic zealotry to kill predators appears to be nothing but a diversion maneuver. The case of Archie's frog clearly illustrates that this proposition is very credible indeed. As dubious as the process to gain consents for industrial developments is, it requires scientific evidence that the ecology of the area concerned will not be unduly affected. Such studies are very expensive and have the potential to create an unfavorable outcome for the industries applying for consent. New Zealand's Leopelma frogs, such as Archie's frog, constitute a globally unique and irreplaceable evolutionary lineage. They are listed as critically endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List and are afforded absolute protection under the Wildlife Act 1953. These amphibians are not only very susceptible to vibrations, but also to environmental toxins. Professor Bruce Waldman, a distinguished herpetologist, once working at the Canterbury University, had suggested to a newspaper that our rare frogs' decline may be due to poisoning. The Department of Conservation responded by withdrawing his research permit, confiscating all his research and specimens, and trespassing him from his area of study. Waldman was effectively forced out of his job and subsequently left the country. New Zealand is bound by international obligations under the Convention on Biological Diversity and has committed, through the New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy, to prevent the extinction of indigenous species and maintain the genetic resources of our unique fauna. Our government's true conservation ideology is attested in Minister Jones' shameless and blatant disregard of New Zealand's internationally binding conventions, which tragically jeopardizes the survival of not just our unique frog species, but many critically endangered species. Evidently, Jones has abandoned all pretense to honor the Wildlife Act and has effectively declared war on nature for his idea of economic growth.
Why do people on the other side of the house hate investment? Why do they undermine jobs? Why do they stand with frogs and geckos and unnecessary critters?
Not long ago, our government accused the Green Party of scaremongering. It seems the smokescreen is lifting.
Kia ora folks, Montua Shane Jones here, New Zealand First. The dawn of optimism has arrived. The fast-track one-stop shop bill is now law.
In May 2025, on Budget Day, as this film was still in production, the Luxon government, without warning, cut all funding for PF 2050 Limited, and the company was disestablished, in spite of former Conservation Minister Barry stressing this company and its leadership will be absolutely integral to the success of the Predator-Free 2050 program. It seems that with the fast-track bill, our government has found a shortcut to open up our precious conservation estates to exploitation, rendering the charade of Predator-Free 2050 Limited obsolete.